met someone and thought they were the best thing since sliced bread, and you either thought it was love at first sight or friendship at first sight, and became best friends or romantic partners, whatever, but then a little bit later on you realized they were really more like crusty old unsliced bread. Well, you are not alone, because most relationships may seem great at first, but as you get to know the person, it may not seem so great once their true colors shine through. According to Mark Knapp, their relationships go through a process that can be modeled by a staircase. The intensifying stage of the relationship starts with initiation and ends with bonding. After bonding, there's a stabilization period where relationships can they may not always be perfect, but they can be maintained. However, sometimes relationships will end up de-escalating, and this is the coming apart stage. So let's go through the stages, starting with initiation. Initiation is your initial meeting, first contact with someone. This is where you make your first impression and you realize if you want to be friends with the person or not, if you want to continue the relationship. In this stage, there would really be nothing more than small talk and getting a good impression of the person. The next stage would be experimentation, which is where you continue talking, you find out things, common interests and things like that, that encourage you to keep the relationship going. It basically is finding out if you're compatible or not. The next phase would be intensifying, which is where if you do find yourself compatible with the person, you start getting into things, deeper things like moral issues, maybe habits that are different or not different, and if you still feel like you want the relationship to continue, you would move on into integrating. Most relationships don't go past the experimentation or intensifying stage. You probably have a lot of pretty like relationships that are just casual, maybe at work or just around the community. After the integrating phase is where you would become a social unit. People start seeing you as a thing, whether you're two best friends, two business partners, or two romantic partners. And if it's romantic, you may change your relationship status to in a relationship. This is where you probably start saying, I love you. And if you really do want to make a commitment to each other, you would go through the next final stage, top of the staircase, which is bonding, where you make a public commitment to each other, most often marriage, or moving in together or something like that. That can be bonding, but really it's most important that it's a public statement. In between the top stage, which would be bonding, which is the peak of intimacy, according to Mark Knapp, there's a stabilization period. Relationships ebb and flow, of course. But a good relationship doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be perfect all the time. The first stage in the coming apart stage is differentiation, where you start realizing, hey, maybe we aren't perfectly compatible, and you start focusing on differences more than similarities. This is a phase where couples might argue and fight, but they will often make up and apologize to each other and move back into the integrating and stage where it's kind of this stabilization area. But sometimes this doesn't always happen, and you may move from differentiating into circumscribing, which is where you start skirting around key issues and you kind of focus more on things that are not important. Like, you don't want to get into a fight, so you kind of avoid most issues. If this progresses, it can go into stagnating and further more into avoiding, where basically the only thing keeping you together is the fact that you don't want to officially end the relationship because it's too painful. And The ultimate end of a relationship would be termination, where you officially decide it's over. This can happen really fast, or it can be more of a process, like a divorce that would take a lot longer. But the end of a business relationship could happen really quickly, or a friendship. And you may not necessarily have to go all the way up the staircase to go all the way back down. You can move from one side of the staircase to the other and just stay on one level, depending on the relationship. But this model kind of gives a pretty good visual representation of the types of relationships and how they may progress. So maybe you can identify what stage you and your partner are at in your close relationships, or even you may identify the stage that you're at with a casual relationship. But this model really gives a good overview of how relationships, just like a staircase, can go up and can go down.